Now they don't, and some of the movies don't.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. If you're following from home, hopefully you have the text sheet that was in the Shabbat bulletin. You don't need the Chumash because everything is in the sheet. And I wanted to do a kind of a deep dive and then a 90-degree turn on verses that many of us know very well. And even if you don't know the original or you don't remember the original source of them, if you ever bless your children on Friday night, or you've been to a wedding or a baby naming where there was a blessing of the children, these words are familiar to you. And sometimes the most familiar words are the ones that we spend the least amount of time in because we feel like we know what they're all about. We're actually not going to linger on the words per se, but on the context in which they were given. So, chapter 6 of Bamidbar, verse 23. Daber el Aaron v'elbanav lemor. God has said to Moses, speak to Aaron, Kohen, priest, v'elbanav, his fellow priests, saying, Ko tevarchu et bnei Yisrael. This is the way you will bless the people of Israel. Amor lahem, say to them. And then words, again, that you've heard many times. And we could do another shiur on what these words actually mean. We're going to kind of accept a normal pshat on these words. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and may God protect or guard you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha, may God shine God's face upon you, v'chuneka, either be gracious to you or be kind to you, something like that. Yisa Adonai panav elecha, may God raise God's face or bear God's face upon you or towards you, v'yasem lecha shalom, and give you peace. Okay, context is that we're in the second parsha of the book of Bamidbar. The Israelites are now in the second year of wandering. The Mishkan has been built, so there's now a prayer space, a tabernacle in the desert. And now the priests are being given certain roles, or certain roles are being described to them. Remember that the priests are the children of Aaron, and who are a subset of the tribe of Levi, who is one of the 12 tribes. And the idea is that although it doesn't say in the verse when or why, right? It doesn't say when this ritual is supposed to take place. It doesn't say, when you're, giving your baby your name, say this blessing. It just says this is how you should bless the children of Israel. We don't necessarily know what the context might be. On its own merits, just the words speaking for themselves, anything come up for anyone as a question or a comment before we read the next commentary? Just on the words themselves, or what might be going on, what the context of this blessing ought to be. Anyone? Okay, we'll jump forward. Look at this commentary by Rabbi Avraham Mordechai Migor. He is one of the Ger Rebbes. He is the son of the Sfat Emet, who is the most well-known of the Ger Rebbes. Ger is a town about 40 miles outside of Warsaw. It's now, if you look on the map now, it says Gur. The Yiddish pronunciation is Ger. On the phrase Ko tevarchu, this is how you shall bless. Look what he says. Lo nemar b'shum makom b'Torah. It's never stated in any place in the Torah. B'lashon sivui, in the language of command, quote, tevarchu. Most times, in fact, all times, when we understand that it to be an obligation from the Torah, it's because we've been given a command to do something. And he notices that the priests were never told by God, one of your obligations is to bless the Israelites. Shehakohanim yivarchu et bnei Yisrael. They were never told in the command form, hey, you have a task. One of those tasks is to bless the children of Israel, right? Because in our verse, it doesn't say you shall bless. It just says, this is how you shall bless. What does he take from that? Ki mitiv'am shel hakohanim. It's in the very nature, the very teva of the priests, shemidatam midat chesed, that their characteristic, their character trait is the character trait of chesed, loving kindness, the very type of person who would want to proffer blessing, even if not asked, right? Which I believe he's saying is a compliment, right? Some people have to be told to do the right thing. These priests didn't have to be told that one of their responsibilities is to bless the people. That's their natural inclination, right? But they've learned it from the way that Aaron has lived his life. They don't need to be told. And he, in parentheses, this concept comes from the Zohar, the Kabbalistic text, Parshat Naso. Shehem atzmam yitoreru mirtzonam. It's a wonderful phrase. That they themselves will awaken themselves. Lehitorer means to be awake. Mirtzonam, from their very will or desire. Levarech et Israel. You don't have to tell them. Of course they're going to want to do it. Ulechein lo hayat sorech litzavotam azeh. Therefore the Torah didn't need to say, hey, priests, got to remind you, right? You have an obligation. You're working in the temple. You're the children of Aaron. One of your responsibilities is to look out amongst all these people, the mixed multitude, and bless them. No one had to tell me that. I know that that's what I should be doing. Hatzav haya ech levarech. Rather, the verse was simply how to bless them, not that they were obligated to bless. Ulechein namar ko tavarchu. Therefore, it says only, by the way, when you come to bless them, here's my suggestion for how to. The idea is that they wouldn't have to be told. In this Hasidic teaching, he is raising up the idea that it's better to do something before you're asked, right? Anyone who's ever raised a child, right, knows that, it is satisfying when you ask your child to do something and they do it, and it's very unsatisfying when you ask your child to do something and they don't do it. But even more satisfying is them doing it before you ask them, right? That they knew, they've been trained properly, or if you're a teacher or any or in a professional situation, right? What a great ma'alah, what a great character trait it is to anticipate the very thing that's important for you to do and then just do it, right? You might be given instructions on how, but you should do it. Okay. So he's raising that up as a concept. Let me pause there for a second, see if any reactions to that as a kind of an ethical or characterological insight into the right way to be. Mark, there's only one mic out there, which is frustrating, but we're going to have to pass along because there are people on Zoom. I keep forgetting. When you remember something on Shabbat, and then I forget when Shabbat's over, I have to keep forgetting to tell them to put more microphones. Mark.
Well, it's a wonderful trait. It's laudable. You can't criticize it. There were two priests who did something they weren't commanded to do.
Say more.
Nadab and Abihu. They seem to have been moved to bring a pan of incense burning. They weren't commanded to do it, and they died because they did it.
Good. So on the one hand, we do want to raise up in a spiritual community the notion that to do something, even though you were not told to do something, is a beautiful thing. But we also have, as Mark wisely says, in our tradition, an example of people taking upon themselves to do something they thought was a good idea. They did it the wrong way. They were offed by God, right? So you're whether or not you read ahead, you've jumped right into the pickle here.
I did read ahead.
You did?
Did not.
Did, right? That our tradition obviously valorizes and celebrates the idea of not having to wait to be told to do something, and I guess you higher credit. But our tradition is also one of what? Of obedience, right? It's a good thing to be commanded, right? The central concept of our peoplehood is mitzvah, right? Is the idea that we believe on some level that God has commanded us to do something, and it's actually the commandedness, not the fact that we weren't commanded, anticipated. It's the very commandedness that elevates us, that we're actually responsive to some greater celestial obligation on our shoulders. Larry?
No, I'm just taking upon myself the obligation to move the microphone.
And no one even asked you to do so.
There you go.
Okay, yes, Rebecca.
I'd like to say that I don't really buy it because it sounds to me more like when they use the ko, when he says ko, it's a little bit like saying, so what do you if you're talking about a kid, so you'll ask, you won't say thank you, you'll say, what do you say?
Right.
It's kind of like this. I think it is a command. It's just, a friendly command.
Great. So on the level of pure Torah study, you could say back to Rabbi Avraham Mordechai of Ger, right? Like, and that's like the wonder and the frustration of open-ended Torah study, because you could choose to read it that way, but that doesn't mean one has to read it that way. You could read it as a command. So absolutely, it could be understood as saying, coming to your child and say, so what time are you going to take out the garbage, right? I haven't given you a command to do it, but yes, I have. Good. Okay, anyone else on just this? Okay, I want to now look. You can sit for a second, Larry, because this part's going to be a while. A relatively long section from the Talmud a couple of stories, and the stories are beautiful and rich in their own right, but it's the punchline of the story that is significant for this conversation. The punchline of the story appears in at least 4 places in the Talmud and probably elsewhere in rabbinic literature as well, but this one has the richest story leading up to it. It's from Masechet Kiddushin, Tractate Kiddushin, mostly dealing with the laws of marriage, but the Talmud jumps around from topic to topic. Page 31a. By weird coincidence, it's the second page of Talmud I ever looked at in the original. When I got to yeshiva for a semester in college in 1994, I had not had a day school education. I had a great USY and Camp Ramah education, but I'd never studied text in the original. The way yeshiva works is that they're not classes on topics. It's just you're studying this tractate, whatever page you're up to. So I got there in January. They were in Kiddushin, page 30. By weird coincidence, and so this was in the first couple of days of my ever studying Talmud in the original.
Marshall, Joel, and I are in Lamed Gimel.
Oh, so you were just here.
We were just there.
So do you want to teach this section?
No. I was wondering how you're going to get here.
Okay. Ba'omine Rav Ula. A bunch of rabbis asked Rav Ula the question. Ad heichan kibud avem. Talmud, very terse language, like the Torah, you have to fill it in. Literally, until when or how far is the honoring of a mother and a father? What do you think is meant by the question, until or how far? Yeah, how far do you have to go? How much do you have to stretch yourself if in the obligation to honor your mother and your father, right? How much do you have to sacrifice? How uncomfortable do you have to become? Amar lehem, he said to them, Tse'u re'u, you know what? Come and look. Ma asa nochri echad ba'Ashkelon. There was a non-Jew who was living in Ashkelon, right? Same place as we think of right now. V'dama ben Netina shmo. His name was Dama, and his father was named Netina. And they knew this non-Jew. Pamachat, one time, Bikshu chachamim prakmatya. The rabbis had some object, some piece of merchandise that they wanted to buy from this Dama ben Netina, b'shishim ribo sachar, at a price or at a profit of 60,000. 60,000 what? Probably dinar, right? Some extremely valuable thing that he owned and they needed. B'haya mafteach, but the key to the box in which this very valuable thing that he could sell was located, munach tachat merashotav shel aviv, was lying underneath the head of his father, who it doesn't say here explicitly, but presumably was what? Sleeping. How quickly would you wake up your father to sell a 60,000 dinar gem? Velo ciaro. He wouldn't touch him, right? My father is sleeping. I have an opportunity to make a great sale, make a big profit. I weigh those two things. Most normal people would say, my father actually wants me to do well in business. Dama ben Netina said, no, my obligation to honor my father is to let him sleep, even if he's sleeping upon the thing that could be the source of great income for me. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Shmuel. Sha'alu at Rabbi Eliezer. They asked Rabbi Eliezer, very similar setup. Ad hechan kibud abe'em, how far do you have to go to fulfill the obligation of honoring your mother and your father? Amar lehem, he said to them, come and see, ma asa nochri achad la'aviv ba'Ashkelon. Same setup. What a non-Jew who lived in Ashkelon once did with regard to his father. V'dama ben Netina shemo, his name was Dama ben Netina, same thing. Bikshu mimenu chachamim avanim la'afod. The rabbis wanted to buy from him precious stones for the ephod, for the breastplate of the high priest. B'shishim ribo sachar, same price. So it's hard to know if this is two stories that are told in two different ways, or if the same exact situation happened more than once, unlikely, or if it's more of a paradigmatic story. But they wanted to spend 60,000 dinar on this set of precious stones for the breastplate. Rav Kahana matne b'shmonim ribo. There's a version of the teaching that Rav Kahana said that it was for 80,000 dinar. A ribo is means 10,000. So 10,000s. Oh, sorry, 800,000. Excuse me. It's even more than that. Yes, 800,000. Bahayam mafteach munach tachat merashotav shel aviv. But again, the key for the box in which these precious stones were underneath his father's head, and presumably he was sleeping. Below tzero. Once again, he didn't disturb him. L'shana ha'acheret. Next year, Natan hakadosh baruch hu scharo. God gave this wonderful father honoring non-Jew his reward. What was the reward? Shenodalo para aduma be'edro. That a red heifer, the very rare animal that the temple needed to create this admixture in order to bring someone out of a status of tumah after being in contact with the dead, so very, very, very valuable, was born in his flock. Nichnesu chachmei Yisrael etzlo. The sages heard about this. They came to visit him to make an offer. Amar lahem yodea ani bachem. He said, I know how valuable this is to you. I know how rare this is. So I know she'im ani mevakesh mikem kol mamon ba'olam, that I ask for any amount, atem not nimli, you would give it to me. Ela ein ani mevakesh mikem, but I'm only going to ask ela oto mamon, the exact same amount she'ifsadati b'shvil kavod abba, that I lost in the previous situation a year ago, whether it's the first story or the second story, because of my father. So first of all, I love the fact that the Talmud has this rich story that is elevating the character traits and the morality and the love of his father of a non-Jew, right? It was not, you can imagine our texts, particularly given how uncomfortable our reality was in the presence of many non-Jews, only focusing on our good traits. Here the Talmud says there's this guy in Ashkelon, he's a role model for all you Jews out there. And not only was he not willing to disturb his father, he wasn't willing to make more of a profit, even in a situation, right? If you're in business, what you hope for, right, is that you have something that becomes priceless that someone's willing to spend any amount of money for, because then you can finally make your, you can make your big sale. No, I'm only going to compensate myself for that which I lost a year ago. This is all the rich story leading to the setup. That is why I'm bringing this to you. Va'amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina said, Uma. This is what we call a kol shekain argument, or an a fortiori argument, where we learn a major principle from a minor principle, or a major example from a minor example. Uma mi she'enu mitzuveh boseh. Think of it. Someone who wasn't commanded what? To honor your father, your mother, because it might be a nice thing if you're a non-Jewish person to honor your parents, but you're not obligated by God to do so according to your understanding of Torah. Someone who was not commanded, ve'oseh, but actually did it anyway, kach, he got such a reward. Mitzuveh ve'oseh, if you were commanded to do so, and you did it, al achat kama b'chama, how much more so would you be rewarded? Meaning that the hierarchy in this story is the opposite of what Rabbi Avraham Mordechai of Gur was saying in his commentary. He was saying on our verse in the book of Numbers that, wow, it's amazing, these priests. They didn't have to be commanded to do so. They just knew how to do it. That's a way to live. Here in the Talmud saying, how much more would someone who was commanded and fulfilled the commandment be rewarded more than the one who was not commanded and fulfilled it? Da'amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina said, Gadol mitzuveh ve'oseh. Greater is the one who is obligated to do something and does it, mimi she'enu mitzuveh ve'oseh, than someone who is not obligated to do so and do it. That is very counter to the original teaching that we read, and counter, I would think, to kind of folk wisdom, right? Or the way we kind of think about training people in character traits, right? We don't necessarily in our society live in a society of obedience. There are certain substructures of our society. In the army, this applies, right? It is much better in a hierarchical situation in the army to fulfill your commander's request than to extemporize and take it upon yourself thinking you knew what would be better. No, you wait for the command, you fulfill it. That makes sense. But outside that, I don't know if there are a lot of other situations in our society where we would put this one higher up. But here Rabbi Chanina is saying, we're learning from Dama ben Natina that if he was rewarded this way, a non-Jew who, despite the fact he was not obligated in Kibud Avim because he's not a Jew, was rewarded this way, if we fulfill that obligation, wow, we're going to be rewarded even more, because that in our tradition is a higher value. Let me pause there. Larry.
Baseball. If you run through the stop sign on third base and you still score, you're going to get criticized by your manager. So there, if you're commanded to score, you're more honored than if you were not commanded to score and you took it upon your own to score.
That's a good example, right? Can anyone else think of an example in our society where you might be more celebrated, more rewarded for doing something because you were asked to do something than doing something because you intuited that you should? Irv and then Mark?
Yeah, my thinking is
Hold on, Irv.
when you do something that you're commanded, you're honoring the commander. That's the difference.
Aha.
I just thought of that because I also appreciate when someone does something I don't have to ask them to do, because I don't feel like wasting my time asking people to do everything. I hope they think for themselves. But you, in the discussion you raised, you made me think you're really honoring the commander by doing what someone commands.
Good. So you're getting into the why this might be the case, right? So we might think, even if it's not our instinct to do that, why might it be the case in Jewish spiritual practice that it's better to be commanded than not to be commanded? Because you're not just getting the right thing done, you're honoring, as you said, the one who proffers, who gives the commandments. Great.
I'm a military veteran, and trust me, the military, plenty of things get done without being commanded to be done.
Oh, I'm sure. But I'm not sure that you get promoted for that. Okay.
No, you get promoted. That's got nothing to do with it.
Look at the next text, bottom of page 3. This is in the same place in Kiddushin. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said, and again, this is another example where the Talmud assumes that you know something about a rabbi, that it's going to come out in the story, even though it doesn't say it explicitly. So we're about to learn something about Rav Yosef, even though it doesn't tell us directly. Meiresh Hav Amina. Originally, I would have said, Man Dahava Amarli, Halacha Kareb Yehuda de Amar. The one who had said to me that the law, this is going to be a little complicated, the law goes like Rabbi Yehuda. Which law? Who said, Sumeh patur min ha-mitzvot, someone who's blind is exempt from the mitzvot. Originally, had someone said to me that he was right, that he's correct, that if you're blind, you're not obligated to mitzvot, Avedna Yom HaTava l'Rabbanan, I would have made a huge day of celebration for the rabbis. Daha la mifkidna v'ha'avedna, for I am not commanded, but I perform. Meaning, what is true about Rabbi Yosef? He's blind, right? The Talmud doesn't tell us he's blind, but he's saying, like, I am blind. I don't, therefore, if Rabbi Yehuda is correct, that someone who's blind is not obligated in commandments, I would be so happy because I don't have anything to fail at, right? So I'm not obligated, but I do the commandments anyway. If someone told me that the halacha was according to him, I would have celebrated. Hashta, but now, the Shamitei Lahad Amar Rabbi Chanina. Now that I heard Rabbi Chanina's statement, which statement? The one from the previous paragraph, that we greater celebrate someone who is commanded and performs rather than someone who is not commanded. Gadol Mitzuvev Yosef Yoter Mimisha Enu Mitzuvev said that the one who is commanded and performs is greater than the one who is not commanded and performs. Adarabah. Now I feel the other way around. Manda Amarli de Ein Halachak Rabbi Yehuda. Someone who says that Rabbi Yehuda is wrong. Rabbi Yehuda, who said that a blind person is exempt from the obligations, if someone tells me that he is wrong, meaning that a blind person is obligated, which means I do have a burden on me, but that burden might lead to greater reward, Avedna Yom HaTava l'Rabbanan. That's the thing I would celebrate. So wonderful thing going on here. He's basically saying, at first, I would have been so happy to tell me that for someone to tell me that I have fewer obligations in life. But now that I understand this concept, I'm going to celebrate if someone tells me I have more obligations in life. I'm all over the place on this because on the one hand, all of us, particularly people who are living busy, complicated, personal and religious and spiritual lives, right? It's nice when we have some of our burdens relieved from us, right? But the religious philosophy that is flowing through this set of texts is that you want to live with more obligations, so you have an opportunity to fulfill those obligations, which deepens your relationship with the Creator, right? Do you want to have fewer obligations on your plate vis-a-vis you and your loved ones so that you have more free time? That might feel good. Or do you want to have more obligations on your plate between you and your loved ones so that when you fulfill them, the bond between you and them becomes deeper? We probably want a little bit of both, which is why these texts are interesting, because they are pushing against the one of our instincts, which is to want to have fewer things to do rather than more things to do. Comments, reactions on that? Going back to what Irv was saying before, we'll end with this. Tosafot, which is a series of German and other Ashkenazi commentators on the Talmud, comments in not only our page in Kiddushin, but also where a similar idea comes up in Avodah Zarah as to why this is the case. So Irv was positing that the reason why we celebrate someone who's commanded and who does more than someone who is not commanded who does is because that way you're really honoring God. Look what Tosafot says. Nir'eh, Gadol HaMitzuveh v'yoseh, the one who is greater and commands, etc., and performs, etc. Nir'eh dehainu taima. It seems to me that the reason is, demi shemitzuveh v'yoseh, if you were commanded to do something and you do it, adif, that is preferred, lefi shedoeg umitzta'er. Those are interesting words. Doeg means to worry. Mitzta'er means to be upset, to be sorry. But he's really using it as a word to describe what goes on in someone's consciousness when they're really focused on taking care of the things that they need to be doing, right? Again, I'll use the parent example. When you have a young infant, you are doeg and mitzta'er. You're worried and concerned to make sure that you're doing all the things to make sure that person can thrive. That's actually a holy sense of worry and concern. So this person is better because they worry and they're concerned yoter. Pein ya'avor mi she'ein mitzuveh sheyesh lo pat b'salo. That person's going to be more focused, more concerned in the holy level, lest they screw up, ya'avor, and transgress, much more than someone who is not commanded and does. Sheyesh lo pat b'salo. He has his bread in his basket. It's a way of saying, what would be a good metaphor? It's like, I'm blanking. The idea is that he's already got, like when you're in a casino, you have money.
House money.
House money. Thank you. Playing with house money, right? If you're not commanded, you have nothing to win, nothing to lose. She'im yirtzeh yanich. If you want to set aside this task, you can, because no one expects anything of you. That's a light way of living. I enjoy days like that. But if you have a holy obligation on your shoulders, you're going to be focused, you're going to be intentional, and in our tradition, that's celebrated more. And on a similar phrase in the Talmud in Tractate Avodah Zarah, a slightly different answer given by the same set of rabbis, the Tosfot in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. Gadol ha-mitzuveh v'yoseh, someone who is obligated is greater than someone who's not obligated. Perush, the explanation is, mipnei shehu doeg tamid levatel yitzro. Because such a person is constantly worried in the sense of like a holy concern about overcoming or canceling his urge. Ulekayem mitzvat boro, ding, ding, ding to Irv. And to be focused on the holy obligation of fulfilling the commandment of your creator, right? We want to be obligated in our tradition. Parentheses. It doesn't always feel great. A lot of burdens don't always feel great, but we are choosing to live a life of obligation so that we can have the spiritual high of fulfilling them, right? And that is considered in our religious society higher than someone who is not obligated but finds his or her way to do the right thing. That's good too. And going back to the Hasidic text we began with, great if indeed his read of the Torah is correct, as opposed to how Rebecca's reading it, that the priests were never told they had to do it and they just did it. That's lovely, right? But it's happening in a society that's actually saying that is second best. What is best is to hear God's voice coming at us from Sinai to this day, putting it on your shoulders to say there are certain things that I must do. Not all of them are easy. Not all of them are convenient. Some of them take a lot out of me. I don't have to necessarily get to the level of Dama ben Natina, who's not going to rearrange his father's pillow so that even though he's going to have a huge sale, I don't have to sacrifice that far usually in my life. But it might require me to stretch and to experience some lack and to go without and to conquer my urges a little bit so that I can be in the category of someone who was obligated to do something and I did it. That's the highest way of living, at least according to this slice of thinking in our tradition. Rebecca, let's get Rebecca the microphone, and we'll end with this.
I think I'm representing the cynical voice here tonight.
Okay.
Which is, I'm wondering if somebody's doing something without being commanded to do it, and it's something nice, then they get their credit from doing it. They don't need the outside credit. If you're told to do something, you have to know that you're going to get credit. And so I think it's sort of a balance of the payment here. If you're doing it on your own, you don't need as much.
Yes, so I'm teaching the lesson in a way to highlight this as a value because it's a counterintuitive value, and I could also teach a version of the opposite lesson, that if you're just seeking validation for having done something, have you not fully internalized what it means to pursue the right and the good on your own? And I think you're right that there's a balance. Listen, if you listen to my teaching and my classics and my sermons the last 15 years, I'm often dancing around edges and encouraging us to balance competing values. So yes, it's also a good thing to have an internal motivation towards the good. And what makes our tradition perhaps different than other spiritual religious traditions is that it's also good to be obedient. It's also good to yield your will to a greater will, because we believe that that is the highest way to live a spiritual life in the modern world. Larry, last comment.
I know you don't want to go here.
Go here.
You are a rabbi in a movement that says that people are obligated, but in general, the people who are in the movement don't feel obligated. They feel like they can pick and choose.
Yeah.
And we know we have streams where it's accepted everyone's obligated, and other streams where it says, yeah, you can pick and choose. And I think we see, to some extent, what happens when you give people the choice about picking and choosing. They sometimes aren't as makpid, they aren't as strict in terms of living up to their obligations.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I will live and complete my career with that conundrum, and still, I believe, content that this is where I chose to do my work, partially because it aligns in an intellectual, honest way with how I understand the Word of God and revelation and the malleability of our tradition. But yeah, I don't mind saying that would I also like to live in a Masorti conservative community where everyone observed Shabbat and Kashrut and came to shul on time? That would be nice too. Right? It would. I don't mind saying that, right? And when I go to Israel or when I spend time in a more traditional community, I know that I couldn't live in that community because of what I think and what I believe. But I have envy for the conformity and for the homogeneity of practice and the sense. Now listen, I'm not sure all those people, even most of those people, are doing all those things because of what we're talking about in the Talmud. It's not necessarily that they are fulfilling their understanding of the will of God. They're doing it because they're in a society that reinforces it, right? And there's nothing wrong with that either, right? So it's not like even in that society, everyone is walking around with a sense of God's command on their shoulder, and everything they do is to fulfill that command. I have many wonderful kind of modern Orthodox cousins in Israel who all live a frum life. I'm not sure how often they think about commandedness. I'm not critiquing them. I don't think to them it's about commandedness. It's about the richness of what it means to live on a moshava dati, near Rehovot, right? And what it means to give your life that purpose. But yes, our movement has struggled with that, and it seems to struggle with it more and more every half generation. And yet this is where I'm planted to try to get everyone to do a little better.